Dan, thank you for coming in. The goal of today is to just troubleshoot, outline some of the different components that you supply us. So after people buy their coach, they're better prepared and they understand all the function, operation, and what to do when they have a problem. So starting at the front of this travel trailer, I want to talk today about the all-new Lippert component power tongue jack.
Absolutely. Well, so with this new tongue jack, made some changes, some upgrades. So new switches, they have a rubber boot on them to help just keep dirt, debris, water, keep that intrusion out of there. Simple operation here. You got an on-off switch to turn the light on or off. That on-off switch does not need to be on in order to operate the tongue jack.
Okay.
So sometimes people will think that that light needs to be on. It doesn't. We simply go ahead and hit the extend or hit the retract portion of the switch, and then we can go ahead and drop that tongue jack down to the ground.
So as we progress with this, I want to try and ask as many questions as possible.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people have different questions. So if I think about when somebody backs up to their campsite, first things first, as you said, they don't have to have that switch on or off. Do they have to have this plugged into shore power to operate?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we want to be plugged into shore power. We'll want to have our batteries fully charged. Otherwise, we're going to have some operational issues. So lack of a battery or lack of that shore power, at that point, we'd have to use the manual override to get this tongue jack either back down to the ground or all the way back up so that we can get towing, either to get it in for service or put it away for the season.
So here we are with the power tongue jack. So somebody buys a coach and they have this. We want them to feel comfortable using it. And I will say on every one of these, they all have a manual override, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So that's another question we get asked is, hey, is mine going to have an override? Yes, it will. So if we just get into the simple function then, or if right off the bat you want to go to maybe some of the troubleshooting or questions that you have seen in operation of this or issues, maybe what are some other things that we would want to just share with everybody while you're here?
Sure. So like I said, simple operation, on-off switch for that light. Extend and retract portion of the switch here, which is going to either extend or retract that tongue jack based on where you need to go or what you're trying to do. One thing, if we go back to that battery voltage we mentioned, they pulled into that campsite, they've drained the batteries, and if they rock this switch, there is an inline fuse down here on this red wire. It's a 30 amp inline fuse that there's potential that if they try to operate that tongue jack, they could trip that fuse. So if that happens, now the tongue jack won't work at all off that wall, or excuse me, off that tongue switch. So they would have to replace that fuse in order to get power back to it.
So for all of you listening, if right away you go to operate the power tongue jack and it's not working, we would recommend one of the first things you do is check that fuse.
Sure, a simple check would be, hey, is it getting power? I rock that I rock that switch, nothing happens. Easy way to see if it's getting power, turn that light on or off.
Okay.
If the light still doesn't turn on, now you know, hey, I do have a power interruption, check the fuse, and then just go down line from there.
Perfect.
And then if there's any additional fusing or any additional wiring past the tongue jack, that's when they're going to want to get a hold of you guys just to verify, hey, you know, is this got a secondary fuse or secondary protection that I would need to identify.
One more question that I'm thinking of too. As you go down the line of your progression to check everything, let's say the fuse is fine, but they get to the battery and there's some corrosion. Mm-hmm. Can corrosion be an interruption enough to not operate this?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Any type of corrosion, whether it's on the power or ground side, any type of loose connection, so maybe they've been towing, you know, regular service checks on your unit is going to be vital to successful operation of stuff. So maybe one of those connections came a little loose, so they're getting intermittent contact between the wire and the batteries. That can cause some operational concerns. They might notice it's going real sluggish or real slow. It could be because their batteries are low, or it could be because of that corrosion. Okay. So in that case, brush that off and just make sure all that corrosion is taken care of as best as possible.
So if they find out, hey, we've gone through everything, the wires are secure, they're not cut, there's no corrosion on the battery, but oops, the battery's dead. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the manual override.
Absolutely. So right on the top of the tongue jack here, you've got this rubber plug. Now you just pop this rubber plug off. Underneath this rubber plug is a manual override nut. Now you get provided this manual override crank. You don't want to use any type of impact or cordless impact drill or anything like that, because you can A, break the motor, but also obviously damage either the manual override nut here, something along those lines.
So I want to be clear, never use power tools for this manual override.
So a standard cordless drill is going to be okay, but anything that has any sort of pneumatics or impacts or anything like that, that can damage the internals of the motor or some external components in this case.
Okay.
So when you get the tongue jack inside the unit, you should be provided this manual override crank. This manual override crank is for the tongue jack. On this specific unit, you have stab jacks for right up front and in the rear. That has its own specific manual override.
So just make sure if it doesn't fit, you probably grab the wrong one.
Grab the other one. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And then right on the top here, simply put the manual override crank on top, and then you're just going to turn it either left or right. Now, in the event that you're still connected to the battery or something along those lines, you're going to want to make sure you pull out that 30 amp fuse that's in line here. Now, we're not connected currently to a battery, so it's not an issue for us. We are connected to shore cord, but if you have a battery, you're going to want to pull that 30 amp fuse out. Otherwise, what you're going to find is it's going to be a lot harder to turn, or maybe not even be able to turn at all.
And one question I do when I ask, because it does come up, is there a safety concern if they don't pull that fuse? Can they still go do it? To your point, it might be more difficult, but they're not going to get electrocuted if they use the manual override.
No, they won't get electrocuted or anything like that. They had the potential to create some backfeed though. Blowing that fuse, possibly causing some other concerns. So they're not going to injure themselves more than likely, other than maybe pulling a muscle, simply because it is a little bit harder to do.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
And if they want to be just double redundancy, they could pull the fuse and they could actually disconnect the battery as well.
Yeah, or they could disconnect. So this red wire right here, this one that's zip tied to the front of that jack, they could just disconnect that from wherever it's wired into the coach here.
And then once they charge up their battery and they're good to go back to using the power, they just simply put this away back in the storage, make sure everything's connected, replace that fuse, and should be in check for the light, and then they'll be back in business.
Yeah, easy enough. The last thing you'll want to do once you're done with manual override is go ahead and put that rubber cap back on so we don't get any water or dirt debris inside that motor housing.
Now here's a question, whether it comes from Heartland RV or you guys, what happens if they lose that protective cap when traveling? Can they order a new one?
They can order a new protective cap. Yeah, so whatever reason they're in a hurry, they stick it on the top of the propane tank covers here, and they get going down the road and it just falls off, they can order a new cap for that. It's not an issue.
Awesome.